John, take it away, man. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to be back, so to speak. Yeah, so I was thinking, especially, the way life has been and what we've all gone through, and especially a lot of you guys who are trying to start a life. It's tough to kind of like know what's out there and how to manage it and kind of deal with everything. And the best thing I always like to do is kind of just share where I came from and the stuff that I went through. And the majority of my career, I would like to think has been failure. And I think the biggest success I've had is the fact that I haven't let it stop me. So it's one of those things where it's like I always say, like, I'm not the best at what I do. I'm just like the most determined to do it. And I think a lot of times that's all you really need. Like, if you have a passion, if you really want to do something, you should never let anything stop you. So that's kind of it's what I've learned, really, learned the hard way. And I'll kind of just start from the beginning. Like, I'm sure, like many of you, I used to love to draw as a kid. I was obsessed with, logos and type and sports uniforms. Even today, I wear my Yankees hat literally like 24 hours a day. When I was a kid, I used to sleep in it. It really hasn't changed much. My kids think it's funny. My wife thinks it's gross. And it's just something that I've always done. And it's something I've always been obsessed with. When I was a teenager, I got into playing in, punk and hardcore bands and stuff like that. And I kind of realized that there was a place for artwork as soon as I started there. Like, once we started playing music and we had this, urge to record our music, then all of a sudden the question came, well, what does the demo cover look like? And what do our t-shirts look like? And what do our flyers look like? And stuff like that. And of course, kind of being like in the punk and hardcore scene, everything's very DIY. So this kind of being like the mid 90s, like there was a lot of stuff that still wasn't accessible. So I just made stuff, and it kind of gave me an excuse to make things. And prior to that, I didn't really have an excuse to make things except for just my own, just from my own desires. I would make comic books, and I would generally do the cover and then kind of like peter out some way, like halfway through the book, because I really enjoyed the cover part of it, not really understanding that was graphic design at the time. But I love doing the logo. I love doing the layout. I love doing kind of the illustrations to tell the story. But actually telling the story was kind of like, I didn't really care about that. So there was all these little hints and stuff along the way that really, looking back on, I was just like, oh, this is where I belong. I understand now, because this is what I've always done. But like, once I kind of got into music, it was, I started kind of designing stuff. I mean, I used to hack stuff together. Like, I'm talking Microsoft Word, 95, using that and clip art and all sorts of weird things, and photocopiers and all that kind of stuff. I got a job at Office Max in the copy department, so I could use all the equipment in there to do stuff for my band. So it was very hands-on, kind of like, stealing equipment type of thing to try and practice my art. But at the time, I didn't know that's what it was. And around that time too is when I started to get access to the internet. I had my grandfather worked for Verizon, and he would get access to internet stuff and all that kind of thing, like, early on. And I started getting involved with that. I started learning how to build websites. So it was kind of like all this kind of thing coming together of like, I can create things and I can make things and I can put them out there. And as I started playing in bands, friends' bands would ask, can you make this for us? Can you make this for us? And little by little, working through high school and into college, I actually got pretty deep into kind of like more of like an indie music scene, and working with, indie bands and small labels and stuff like that. And I kind of found my niche. Like, I loved working on music packaging and promotion and stuff like that. And I really loved that. And I thought that there was going to be a runway for me to kind of get into the music industry that way. Like, I loved playing in bands, and I loved music. And I thought this was the perfect way to dive in. And in the early 2000s, I had kind of amassed a decent enough portfolio with decent enough stuff from decent enough small labels where, I felt comfortable maybe going out into the world and making my way into the music industry. And then the iPod came out, and then no one really cared to spend much on music packaging anymore, especially small labels. It was all, 300 by 300 JPEGs that would show up in iTunes and small resolution computers and stuff like that. And literally like little iPod screens that were like this big. And that's all that anyone really wanted at that point. And then it was like some labels wanted PDFs of the liner notes and stuff like that, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as, obviously making a record, which wasn't huge then, but like even CD jackets, like stuff like that. My dream was to create CD cases that had clear trays, because I loved like the tactileness of layering 3D of, the booklet, and then you open it up and there's the disc and there's the clear tray, and you could do stuff. And there was a lot of albums that kind of had interesting ways of managing that. And I wanted to be able to experiment with budget and stuff like that. But by the time I had gotten to the point where I could actually do that, it was kind of on its way out. So around that time, I was in college, and I had to try and start thinking of other ways to, practice my craft and kind of get out there and be a professional. And I had some great teachers. I kind of didn't really know that graphic design was even a thing, even though I was doing it. I remember I looked at 2 schools. Like, I didn't really even know what some of the schools were that even had art or design or anything. I grew up 20 minutes from Manhattan, and I had no idea, SVA, Parsons, Pratt. I didn't know any of these schools existed. I didn't know what they were. I went to a school for architecture first. And I remember I must have had the flu or something the day that I went with my parents to go look at it, because I had a fever. And we walked through the campus, and they were like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "It looks great. I want to go home." And I remember going home feeling sick, and I was like, "Great, I'll send my application in, whatever." And then my parents were like, "You should at least look at one more school." And I went and I looked at one more school, and I brought my portfolio of just like random art stuff that I did in high school. And I remember filling out the application, and I was like, "But what is this thing?" And it said like communication arts. And the receptionist was like, "Oh, that's like when you design like logos and posters and stuff like that." And I remember looking at her, and I was like, "That's a thing?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's a thing." And I was like, I was just like, "Oh, okay, well, that's everything that I have." So she's like, "Well, then you're good. Do that." So I didn't even know. I was just kind of doing this stuff because I liked it as an art form. But I learned at that point that was a thing. So even when I was doing the music packaging and stuff in high school and kind of working my way through, still didn't know that was like a career. I thought that was like a part-time thing or something that like, people would, throw you some money for doing it as like a favor so that you could play on a show or something like that. So I went through college, became very friendly with my teachers. My teachers were cool because at that point I was pretty much self-taught. I taught myself Photoshop 3 in like 10th grade. I had a really busted up copy of Quark, and Illustrator, which I knew how to do like 2 things in. And to this day, I don't really think I know how to do much more in Illustrator. So I kind of learned what I needed to learn, I guess. And getting through college and kind of learning from them a little bit more about the business and less about kind of like how to use filters in Photoshop and how to typeset and stuff like that was actually pretty helpful. And I remember at the senior show, we had to display some stuff. And there were 2 guys that were there from a local agency. And it was a small agency. And they came up to me after the show and they were like, "Hey, we love what you do. We'd love it if you'd stop by and, take a look at a project that we have. Maybe you'd be interested in working with us." So I got all excited. So I was like, "Yeah, this is great. Like, this is like legit people in the industry and they want to talk to me," like not knowing anything about anything. So I remember going, I had that meeting with them, and my mom, of course, was just like, "Well, you gotta be presentable." So I wore, my big ass like high school graduation suit. It was like 10 sizes too big, and I brought my portfolio and I show up, and it's like literally it was like one room over a deli. And I walk in there, it's just like two dudes wearing sweatpants, and they're just like listening to the radio. And I just felt so out of place. And they were like, "Hey," and I was like, "What's up?" And they were just like, "Yeah, so we want to develop a clothing company for this MMA stuff that's coming out." And I didn't really know what it was. UFC was kind of like a whatever thing, and I wasn't into that. So I was like, I kind of have an idea what it is. And this was before like all those like tap out brands and all that stuff came out. So I give them credit. It was a good idea. But I remember like showing them my stuff, and then they never called me back again. So I was just like, man, was it the suit? Was it the work? Was it me? Am I no good? Whatever. But I also remember seeing them sitting there in this little studio with two desks over a deli, and they were just like, "We have so much work, we don't even know what to do with it." And just like looking at them and being like, I can do what they do. And like, of course, being 21 years old or whatever, I was just, I can do what they do and I can do better. But like, that summer, learning that it was hard to do that was kind of like the first rude awakening that I had. So it was like, I'm thinking I'm a hotshot. I'm like, these guys already want to talk to me. This is great. They got so much work. I can go in there. I could swoop in, steal all their work. I'm awesome, whatever. And I remember college ended, and I thought that I was going to go straight to freelancing. And at the time, I was freelancing for small labels and stuff like that, but I was also working construction with my dad, and I was still working at Office Max, and I was going to college, and I had friends and a girlfriend, and I was very busy. And at the end of college, literally all that stuff went away. And all I was left with was like two bands and a small label. And, once one band was done, they didn't need any more stuff, because then they went to go play shows. And the small label needed less and less. And that was it. I didn't have any other things to keep me company. All my friends were still in college in different states and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of on my own. And I remember I would sit there, and I would try to come up with stuff and try to find ways to get business and things like that. And it would be one of those things where I would sit there and I would say, this is really hard, but maybe I'm thinking too much. So I would take a break and I would watch a movie, and then I would sit back, and then I would take another break, and I would go to the beach, and then I would take another break, and I would go get a sandwich. And it was just like, that was like 3 months. And then finally, I remember just being like, something's got to give. Like, I just need to get out of this rut. So I went and I got a job at a firm that only catered to financial advisors. And basically it was just like, they hired me, and they were like, "We want you to be the assistant to the creative director." And I mean, it sounded important to me, but basically what they wanted me to do was show up an hour early and leave an hour late, and just do whatever the creative director needed me to do. So I went in there, and it was just like this weird little marketing firm, and everybody there was like, they were nice, but everybody was stuffy, and it's financial. So it's like everything was navy blue and forest green and gold. And all the clients wanted the same fonts. They all wanted Trajan, and they all wanted it to feel rich. And I remember just being like, this is so boring. And I'll never forget, like, as a kid, I never drank or did drugs or smoked or anything like that. And I remember, they were just like, "Oh, here's pictures from the holiday party last year." And it was just like everyone like partying on a party bus in Midtown Manhattan, and like everybody was drunk and passing around weed and stuff like that. And I was like, this is not my scene. I gotta get out of this place. And a friend of mine that I went to school with was working at a print shop, and they were printing press, but they also did design work for promotional stuff for like MTV and Comedy Central and things like that. So it was like flyers to promote a comedy show or an event or something like that in like Times Square or whatever. But it was cooler than what I was doing. So I remember I took a pay cut, and I went to go work there because I just thought it would be more fun. And it was kind of fun, but also not really fun, because we needed to print so much material that the guy who owned it was just like a maniac about getting things done on time. So it was like, if you did a good job, no one said good job. If you did a bad job, you would get screamed at, and something would get thrown across the room and be like, "You just fucked up the whole print job, and it would just be, you either felt really bad about yourself or you felt neutral. There was no good. And it was kind of like terrifying at first because I thought I was on this like great level. I like blew past all the people in the marketing firm because they didn't care. I did like 6 weeks worth of work there in like 4 days. And I was like, man, design is so easy. And then I started working there, and my friend who brought me in, I actually taught him how to design. And it was like another rude awakening. And it was just like, wow, I gotta get my ass together, because I'm like, I'm all over the place. I can't think straight. This is like too fast for me. And one of the guys that worked there was also like an ex-graffiti person, and he was just like really into lettering and stuff like that. So I'm sitting there and I'm learning how to work fast, and I'm learning how to do things well, and I'm learning how not to dwell on mistakes and how to just get over it and keep moving. And then I have this other guy who I made friends with, and he's showing me about lettering styles and all the different ways that he would manipulate lettering and all this stuff. And all these things I had an interest in, but it was like, this was like a really good place where it all started to sync up. And eventually I felt comfortable enough where I could go out and do my own thing. So I was there for, I don't know, about 8 months or so. And me and the guy who worked there would always butt heads, but we kind of had a respect for each other. So when I left, he was cool about it. And instead of just kind of like cutting ties, he was like, instead of hiring someone new, I'm just going to farm the work out to you. So that was my first foray into like a studio. And then my friends who helped get me the job there also left and joined on with me, and we had our own studio. So it was great. So we started doing that. We made friends with some other small agencies, and they needed us to kind of be their design department. So we picked up a couple of retainers and stuff like that. And then after a couple of years went by, we're sitting down around 2008, and we're working with a couple of these small agencies, but we're also doing stuff for all these like new sneaker shops that started popping up, and these streetwear companies, and a couple of things here and there for bands and stuff. Cause some of the bands that we knew back, years prior to that started getting bigger. So we were getting little stuff here and there. So all the fun stuff was super cool, but it didn't pay anything. And the agency stuff was super lame, but it allowed us to keep the lights on and have a real job that we were independent. So 2008 comes around, and we get hit with the recession, and literally the two companies that were keeping our lights on both went out of business. And we were just left with a couple of the cool companies that didn't pay for shit. And around that time also, I got engaged and I had an apartment, and it was like, okay, things are starting to get scary because now we can't pay for anything. We have no money. We don't know what to do. Reality check number 3, and this is like the story of everything. It's just like every time you feel like something good is happening, something bad comes in and just like kicks you around. So we had a brilliant idea of making cool merch for the TV show Lost, because Lost was huge at the time and we really liked it. And all the t-shirts and stuff were lame, and it was like holiday season and Black Friday was coming up and all that. And we were like, we could make quick money if we make cool Lost t-shirts, put up a site really fast, and like, hustle it and try to make like a couple bucks here and there. Little did we know is prior to social media, we got picked up by a couple of bigger blogs, and a bunch of people bought shirts from us. And it was great because we just, all of a sudden, we just had like a couple $1,000s fall into our pockets, and we felt like we just cracked the case. And then eventually, within that short amount of time, we also got a cease and desist from Disney for using their IP without prior approval from them. So we had to stop making the shirts, but we didn't get sued and we didn't have to give any of the money back, which was great. So we decided maybe it was time to do something more like that. So then we created a t-shirt company called CXXVI, and it was only supposed to be a t-shirt company. And it was basically all of our old t-shirt designs that we didn't have, random designs and illustrations and stuff that clients didn't like or didn't want. And we put them on t-shirts and we made it a thing. And my partner, Matt, was also a photographer. So we shot this little lookbook and things like that. And we put it up there, sent it to those same blogs that put up our Lost t-shirts. And they were like, yeah, we'd be happy to post them. So that was great. So we got a little bit of press, but then we started getting emails of like, hey, I love those jeans. Hey, I love that shirt. I love that hat. When are those coming out? And we were just like, next season, because we were like, we're not going to tell people that we didn't make those because we could probably figure out how to make those. And we didn't want to like turn anything down that was going to be money for us, because at that point we're still struggling to even live. So we, took the train into Midtown and met up with some, garment people and learned how to make samples and learned how to find, different fabrics and buttons and all that kind of stuff. And then out of nowhere, it was just like, okay, I guess we're a clothing company now. So then we started doing that, and little by little, we called this store, we called that. Hey, you guys want to check out our stuff? You want to check out our stuff? Then we found out about trade shows. We didn't know what trade shows were. So we found out about trade shows. And if you were a new brand, you could pay like half price to get a booth. So we did that. And, we flew to California. We brought our stupid t-shirts and stuff and our 2 samples of button-up shirts with us. And we're like, hey, check us out. And, people started to like it, and they liked the illustration work on the shirts, and they liked the design and the whole aesthetic and all that kind of stuff. And the whole company was like basically made on the backs of one of our other companies that we would order shirts from and print for and stuff like that, because we would screen print in-house. And sometimes they would order extra shirts or whatever, and we would just take those for us, print on them, and sell them on our site. And that was kind of like the whole company just started on that. And then, we didn't have any money for tags or anything like that. So what we would do is we would sit there and we would cut the tags out of the shirt, and we would have stamps made up, and we would literally take screen printing ink, stamp it, and then stamp it in the neck of the shirt. And we would get these little, manila tags, and we would stamp those, and we would handwrite the date on them. And we would just be like, every piece is unique. They're all handmade, and they're all, it was like handcrafted and blah, 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 blah. And that's before that became kind of like, it like literally everything is like handcrafted now. Like go to Home Depot and the sign says like handcrafted power tools or something, like it was when we actually felt like we could say that, and it like actually made sense. And that was kind of like our gimmick at the time, and no one was really doing it. There was like maybe like 1 or 2 other companies that had a similar vibe. So like people would pay attention for that reason alone. But really, it was just because we were poor and we were really bad at what we did. So we made it seem like everything was different on purpose, when in reality, we were just bad at it. So that was kind of like our first lesson in branding and marketing from like a larger mainstream perspective. Like, how do you twist the story to be something positive as opposed to something negative, which you're, perceiving it to be. So we started working with it. We started getting a little bigger. Things were going well. We started to understand a little bit more, and we picked up an account from a store called Metro Park, which used to be in malls all over the country. And they ordered 2 seasons worth of stuff from us. And it was 70 stores it was going to be in. It was literally going to be in every mall in America. And it must have been over $200,000 worth of merchandise. So for us, that was like, wow, that's enough to get us going, to make this a real business. Maybe we can hire a couple people. We could do it the right way. We ended up working with a factoring company, which was basically like they front the money for the production. They pay us for it. And then they collect from the client. And then they take a percentage off the top for fronting the money ahead of time. So everything was working out great. And then my partner, Matt, and I had this really bad feeling that something wasn't quite right. And so he emails the person at the company and is just like, hey, your invoice is, a couple of weeks overdue. Just sending you a reminder. And they were like, yeah, no, everything should be fine. And then like literally like 24 hours later, one of our salespeople got in touch with us, and they were like, hey, did you see, I forget what site it was on, but did you see this site? We were like, no, why? It's like, go check it out. So we went, and it's just like Metro Park declares bankruptcy. Everything must go. So we were like, so what does that mean for us? And they were like, well, it means they're going to liquidate all your materials and they're not going to pay for them. And I was like, oh, wonderful. So that left us with, I think it was about $160,000 in debt. So coming from nothing and then going into $160,000 worth of debt was pretty terrifying. So we get on the phone with the factoring company, we go through the contract and everything. And basically in the contract, it says, if something of that magnitude happens, the signers of the contract, which was Matt and myself, are responsible for the money that we have to pay back. So the guys there were pretty nice. And they were like, don't worry about it. We'll just get some more accounts and blah, blah, blah. We'll make it up. We'll take a higher percentage and we'll even up over time. Okay, great. Only problem is we got no money to do anything now. We were stuck as stuck can be. So we're doing the best that we can to try and figure out ways to do this. And at the time, so backtrack slightly. Before that happened, I had a little bit of intuition that something wasn't going to be great. And thanks to the clothing company, people were starting to notice my illustration work, my lettering work, the branding and all that kind of stuff. So all the work I had been doing up until that point, I didn't really get much attention for anything, but thanks to the clothing company, you know, there was like ad agencies calling us. There was like movie studios calling us. You know, our shirts were in TV shows and movies and stuff like that. So we were getting traction and people were starting to know our names. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to start freelancing on the side again. I feel like I can do the kind of stuff I want to do. I put up a website of only the stuff I liked instead of the stuff that I thought people wanted to see. No more brochures and business cards and any of that. It was just straight up illustration and lettering and logos and stuff like that. And I was getting calls from agencies and I was starting to work on bigger campaigns. So I'm kind of glad that I did that, because what ended up happening was about a year or so after all this stuff went down, my wife and I at the time, so we got married. We were going to move out of our apartment. We were going to buy a house. My wife was pregnant. We were ready to start our life. And right as we were doing that, Hurricane Sandy hit. So when Hurricane Sandy hit, we were living in Brooklyn on the East River at the time, but we had just moved a little bit north of the city, in the lower Hudson Valley. And we bought our first house and we're ready to start a family and all that kind of stuff. And I was going back and forth to the studio and stuff like that. And we also had a different studio that was a little further east out in Long Island, right on the water. So what ended up happening was Sandy came in and took out our studio with all of our equipment, all of the materials that we had prior to that, all of our samples, all of our trade show booth stuff, like literally everything we had, the studio was just filled with water. So basically anything that we had to try and get us back to zero was destroyed. And I remember we did a little pop-up shop thing in the city for like a holiday type of thing. And we showed up with like literally like a folding table and like one box of stuff. And we were just like, yeah, we don't have it. It was all washed out to sea, you know, during the hurricane. And, you know, people felt bad for us, but like, what are you going to do? Like we weren't the only people that were destroyed by it. So, so it was super rough. And we were kind of stuck. And at that point, we didn't have we couldn't do anything. The factoring company was like, great, well, we're going to send collections after you guys now because we need our money. And if you can't make any clothes, you're going to just have to pay us back somehow. So I remember at that time, so figure I'm in a new house with a mortgage. I have a pregnant wife that's just about to give birth. And then my grandmother who basically kind of raised me. My younger brother was born with Down syndrome, and in the early 80s, that was a tougher thing to deal with. And he had heart surgery that a lot of kids died from, and he successfully completed it. So when my parents spent all the time in the hospital with him for a few years, I lived with my grandparents. And my grandmother, who was super close to me, and she would take me to Pearl Paint, which was like an amazing art supply store here in the city. She would take me there and buy me like whatever I wanted, and we would just sit there and draw. She taught me calligraphy when I was like 8 years old. She would, she would get me like cartooning books, and I would learn how to draw characters and all this kind of stuff. She developed Parkinson's and she passed away. And I remember it really, really affected me. And when we were at the cemetery, I remember getting a phone call from someone, and I answered the phone call, and it was a lawyer telling us that we were being sued. And I remember just kind of like totally losing it and didn't know what to do. And it was, I was just like, I can't deal with this right now. I'll get home, I'll call Matt, we'll figure out something to do, and whatever it was. So we start to kind of figure things out a little bit. A year passes and my grandfather passes away also from cancer. And I remember again at the cemetery, a phone call, and I answer it, and it's the same goddamn people. And it was one of those things where it's just like, you look around and you just like, am I like cursed? Like, is someone watching me and is just trying to kick me when I'm down? And it was the same thing, except this time I remember the guy who was there left and a new guy showed up, and this collections company was in Florida. And the new guy who was there was actually from the same neighborhood that I grew up in. And I told him the story of everything that happened. He was like, oh, he's like, don't worry about it. I'll help you guys out. That guy who was here was a jerk. He's gone. He's like, I see you guys have been trying your best and blah, blah, blah. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. So he was able to kind of like go in there and kind of talk stuff down on our behalf, which like he shouldn't have done. But I think it was like kind of like one of those like neighborhood things, or he's like, oh, I know where you guys are from and I'm from there. And he's like, I think a little nostalgia kicked in for him. And he was just like, if we get it down to this, can you guys pay it off in a year? And we were just like, yeah, we can do that. So we just hustled as much as we could, paid it off, got rid of it, and it was done, closed the clothing company and kind of called it a day. And then after that, I was just like, I'm not going to do anything that I don't understand anymore. So at that point, I just started, going hard on the freelance and just really, really going for it. And I started to like really, find a good place for myself with agencies and with companies. And I wanted to try and get back to branding, where I kind of had started in the early 2000s, which I really loved. But at the time also, it was like hand lettering was a thing, and kind of all this like craftsmanship, Americana, blah, 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 was like huge. And we had done a lot of that with the clothing company. So I was getting hired for all of those campaigns. And I wasn't going to say no, because I just had to pay a shit ton of money, for things that I really didn't have any control over. So I was like, I need to make up all of this debt now. So I was saying yes to everything. And through that, I actually started to make a lot of connections and meet a lot of people in the industry. And, always grateful for everything that I ever had and everyone that came to me with a job. So I think people appreciated that. I think they also appreciated the fact that I was just doing what I wanted to do. Because at that point, I was like, how much worse can this possibly get? So it was just like, I'm just going to do things the way I do it. If people don't like it, like, I guess I'll finally quit. If I can't do it the way I like it, then I just won't do it at all. So I think people actually gravitated towards that because they understood that I was being very honest about how I was doing the things that I was doing. And then cut to a few years later, I kind of go back in and I developed the studio again. And now it's a branding studio. Now we have a reputation. I have a couple of people working with me. And there's definitely ups and downs. There's stuff that comes through where it's just like, this is the one that's going to bring us to that next level. And, something happens and it gets taken away. I remember there was, one thing, and this one is bad too, because this made me feel bad for the person and not even for me, because it was so much worse for her. We were working on this huge company out of Australia that had all of these brands. It was basically like they bought up these brands. They wanted to rebrand everything. It was going to be massive. It was going to be kind of like an international thing. And we were going to run all of it. And the woman who we were working with had to travel a lot. And she traveled to, I forget which country, but she ended up getting Lyme disease from this particular country. But it was like some really nasty version of it. And she ended up getting really sick from it. And she had to resign from the board. And the whole thing just crumbled under her because she was like a really dominant force going forward. And then it was just like, oh my God, are you okay? Is this project still okay? Like, it was one of those things where it's just like, I hope you're okay, but also like, this was going to be a big break for us. So she ended up being okay, but the project was gone. And, stuff like that happens all the time. And it's just like, every time you think there's going to be a big break and it's going to put you to that next level, something will come by and kind of swipe it, out from under you. And then you just realize it's like, I just got to keep working. I just got to keep working. And it's one of those things that's like, it's a lesson that I'm always just like, I look to the universe and I'm just like, I get it. I learned it. But every now and again, it keeps teaching it to me. And I keep taking it as a sign that I just have to keep working harder and harder and just, never get comfortable and always just try to be like the best version that I can be and be even better than that when I can. And now that, I'm a dad and I have 2 kids and I have this home and I'm really trying to, be a good example for my family and try to help out as many young designers as I can. It's just, it's something that I feel like is so important to be able to share with people, especially when times are really tough, is that, it never ends. And there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes the tunnel's a lot longer than you'd like it to be, but you always come out the other side. And if there's something that you really, really, really love doing, you should never stop. Like if you stop in the middle of the tunnel, it's going to always be dark and scary. But if you keep going, you'll get to the end and it'll be amazing. And you'll be able to take a breath and you can relax for a minute before you get to the next tunnel. And every time you go through one, you're going to be at a better and better place. You're going to learn more. You're going to make new relationships. You're going to understand more about yourself and understand things about yourself where it's like things that you might take as a negative are actually positives. In the industry, I think a lot of people forget that uniqueness is a good thing and not a bad thing. Especially with social media, you see a lot of people kind of copying people because it's like, this gets a lot of likes and this fits into the algorithm and all that kind of bullshit. But like, there was a time when doing something different and experimental was exciting. And I think a lot of people really still crave that. And the whole kind of like algorithm culture that we're in has us all brainwashed because it's become such a huge part of our lives. But, you know, I think that as younger designers and even, you know, my generation and the generations after me, I think if there's a place and a time where we can kind of all, you know, be excited about being unique again, it will truly help kind of move things in the right direction. And I feel like, you know, little by little, you start to see that as people kind of get frustrated with what's out there on, you know, that they see on their phones every day and stuff like that. You know, everyone's kind of like, well, no one even sees my stuff. Why do I play by the rules of this stupid machine? You know, so if you keep trying and if you keep, you know, putting your best foot forward and putting that creative effort out there, you know, little by little, people will notice and people will like you for who you are and for what you do. And, you know, before you know it, you could be the next person that starts a new trend or, you know, whatever that kind of like leadership role is that you kind of fall, you know, find yourself falling into ass backwards is a huge learning experience. And then you've kind of like stepped up a little bit and then you can share your information and everything that you learned with kind of like the generation below you. And then, you know, little by little, it's kind of like this really great kind of like learning chain where we can all kind of like help each other and do some really cool stuff. And I mean, that's really what I've learned. And I've gotten to work with some really great companies in my career. And I've done some dream projects and stuff like that. But I never sit there and look at it and say, you know, this is where it ends. This is as good as it can be, because, you know, you can always keep learning and you can always keep trying your best to do something new and interesting. And there's plenty of road ahead. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Good job, man. You guys have a question, more than welcome to go up. Get up to the laptop just so we can hear it. Does anybody want to start? John, with everything you learned through that story, right? What have you learned makes for a good designer to work with, regardless of hiring, partnering with, whatever, other than design skills? What makes a good, you know, design kind of partner, someone that you want to work with?
The best thing, and I deal with this on a daily basis too, like especially with some of the bigger companies that I work with that have internal design teams, nobody works with an asshole. Like it's especially when you get these people who are like good at design and act like they're better than you or whatever. Like, yeah, like you could be envious. I wish I could do what they do, but like they suck. Like they're annoying, and like you go home and you complain about them. Like you want to work with people who are like-minded in the terms of like, you know, they respect you and you can respect them, and you can challenge each other, but also appreciate each other's ideas. Like that's a really, really big thing. Like actually being good to one another does make a difference. And now that I'm in a position of leadership where I can say those things, I have never been so happy to be able to just say, you're not nice and we don't want you.
That's exactly right. That's great. Anybody else? Questions? I know you got one. Chris, you want to go first? Go on, Chris. Yeah.
Hey, John, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for taking the time here, man. Your story is very inspiring. So my question is, so you kind of had like a really wild story, and I guess a lot of us are kind of like also trying to figure it out as we go. What is like one pivotal thing that you think kind of helped to guide you? And then one piece of advice that maybe you can give to us?
Something to guide you. It's a good question. I feel like it's almost like everybody's different, right? Because especially like in the art world, there's a lot of us that are shy or feel uncomfortable in certain situations. A lot of the reason why a lot of us are artists is because we don't want to be out and be outgoing and all that kind of stuff. Art is kind of the way that we express ourselves. It's not necessarily like going at like I would venture to say probably most of the people here are not like huge party people. Like that's like it was never my thing. I really liked to be kind of like in my own space, which is why my studio is in my home and not in like a big shared space. But like one of the things that's super important is to pull yourself out of your comfort zone every now and again. Like I found that the times that I found myself outside of the place that I was comfortable were the times that I had to be creative in making the most out of it. And I actually found myself learning a lot from those experiences. So I would say like sometimes, and it doesn't have to be all the time, but because like some experiences you don't necessarily need to learn from, like I've been in experiences where I learned a lot from and I wish I didn't. But there are definitely times where you're just like, like maybe I don't like to be around a lot of people, but sometimes maybe it's good if I go to that design event and I just go there and I could just stand in the corner and watch. And I don't have to talk to anybody. I can leave early or whatever. But sometimes you never know. Sometimes you might enjoy something. Sometimes you might find someone who's very like-minded. And it's just like, maybe just as like nervous about being around people as you might be or something like that. Or maybe you see that there are a lot more people like you or think like you or are interested in stuff that you are. And, little by little, you find these little communities or these little, corners of the world where you're just like, oh, that's me. That's like, this is like a place where I feel like I belong. And when you kind of start to pull yourself out and allow yourself to get into those places, you'd be surprised at how quickly people start saying, hey, I want to work with that person. I met them at this and that, and we had a great conversation, or I really they had like great style, or, they had some funny stuff to say, or they had great comments about the stuff that we were looking at. And you don't know like how these relationships start, but they're like out there and they're waiting for you. And that's kind of how you can make a lot of things happen. Like a lot of times it's always like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You got to meet people somehow. And sometimes it's just kind of putting yourself in those positions to kind of just get out there and just like rub elbows with people that you normally wouldn't. And you might realize that there's like a whole like community of your desired life out there kind of waiting for you. So like for me, it's and I found that when I put myself out there and I've like it's so weird too, because I have no problem standing in front of a room of 2,000 people on stage and telling a story and answering questions and all that kind of stuff. Do I want to be in a room of 2,000 people? 100% no. But like, it's kind of like this weird thing where I'm not a shy person, but I also am also a person that likes to keep to myself. So it's like a weird kind of thing that I deal with all the time, where it's just like, I don't necessarily want to be there, but when I am there, I try to make the most of it. And it's one of those things that I found like actually helped my career a lot too. Like the more and more I started doing lectures and talks and things like that, I got to meet more people, and people would share their stories with me. And, you learn a lot more about like what other people are dealing with. And it's just like, okay, mine's not that bad, or well, mine's way worse. And, like just kind of understanding what the world is doing to everyone else. And sometimes misery loves company, and you go, okay, good. It's not just me that got screwed by this thing. And I feel like a little bit better knowing that I'm not singled out, and it's those types of things really go a long way to helping you push yourself and advance your career, and also help you grow as a person and, appreciate the world for what it is.
And I love that. I think it's safe to say that a lot of us are like this. So words of wisdom right there, man. Thank you. Josh, you had a question, man?
Josh.
Yeah, I did. Just wanted to first off say thank you so much for speaking with us, John. I absolutely love your work. I actually do have your book Brand by Hand, and I've been like
Thanks.
following your work for a few years. And I'm just wondering, like, what are you like looking for in designers for your studio, Contino Studios? And can you speak more about the culture that's like within the studio as well?
The culture is funny because I think a lot of people expect a certain thing, and it's not really what it is at all. Like I truly appreciate honesty. I appreciate respect, but in terms of style, I like all different types of styles. Like a lot of people know me for things that I've done in the past, but when I work with other designers, I would so much rather them bring their personality in, as opposed to kind of saying, well, I'm like John, or I want to be like what John has done or whatever, and I'm just going to do the same thing. Like, I'd rather you be you and you bring your experience and your style, and because not only does that help the studio look, like we can do a lot more things, but it also is, I just appreciate it because there's certain things that I can do and there's certain things that I can't do. And just as much as a younger designer would say, I want to learn from you, like I want to learn from them. And that's kind of a really important thing for me too, because there's so much to youth and kind of inexperience that is a really great lesson for people that have started to become old and bitter about things. And especially like, I always think about it like from like a band point of view, right? Like when you like a band, their favorite, your favorite music from them is the stuff that they made when they were like 22. And it's like wild and crazy and inventive and all over the place. And then, the band goes through phases and they, like they stick around and they're in their 40s and 50s or whatever. And it's like the instrumentation is beautiful and it's smart and it's seasoned, but it doesn't have that like that youth energy of like, I don't give a shit. I'm just making because I want to make. And that's like the core essence of everything that we always try to do, is just trying to find that like explosive energy of being excited about something. So I think as long as you can be excited about something, and it's like, it's never, it's never too serious. Like we are constantly like joking, like there's like everything is a joke with us. We take our work seriously, but like literally everything is a joke at all times. We make fun of everything, each other, everything that we do all the time, because it's like, in one way, it's kind of good to kind of like keep everything loose, because a lot of times designers can get very uptight about this is my art and I'm nervous for someone to criticize it because if you criticize someone's art, you're criticizing them, because their artwork is their soul on paper or on the screen, right? So we always try to like keep it super loose and like, I make fun of myself as much as, they make fun of me, or I make fun of, like, it's just like, it's just got to be like open, like this is an open creative place where you can kind of say and do anything to keep us all feeling comfortable and creative and interested. And I'm like constantly throwing out stuff of like stuff that I enjoy. Like we're sharing cartoons that we loved as kids and all sorts of random stuff, just to kind of be like, why did you love that? Like I even, my daughter is 9 years old and she absolutely loves design and film and animation and all this stuff already. And it's been great to watch her develop into that. And I've already started sharing kind of like, the old episodes of Beavis and Butthead and Liquid Television that used to be on MTV and all these crazy like indie cartoons that were around in like the early 90s that I loved. And she just like, because you don't see that, everything's like Pixar now and whatever. And you don't kind of see that like random, like NYU student, like avant-garde, whatever on TV anymore. Like it just doesn't exist. And her eyes would like open up. And then I would send it to like some of my designers who are in their 20s and they're like, oh my God, what is this? And I'm like, oh, right. You don't know this either because you were a baby when this came out, So it's like all this kind of stuff is, we try to keep it loose and energetic. And whenever something gets a little too serious is when I'm like, I even the most serious brand can still have a lot of, fun energy to it. And that's kind of like maybe the most important thing that I like to keep within, our group.
Thank you so much for answering the question. That's so cool. I really love it. Thank you again for speaking with us today.
Totally.
Anybody else here or online? Question, go for it. And on up there.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Catherine. I wanted to know from all your years of making art and working with other artists, what's something that you've noticed that from other people's work that you just really enjoy?
Well, you know, it kind of, it changes year after year, right? Because it's like, as trends change and all that kind of stuff, you start to see different people experiment with different things. And I one thing I love, and especially kind of going back to the youthful thing, it's funny like seeing kind of like the 90s and the early 2000s come back as like kind of like a stylistic influence now, and being able to say like I was kind of like an adult or a young adult at that time, and kind of living all those trends, and now seeing them kind of be rehashed and kind of recycled in a new and interesting way has been really fun for me. I also love just like seeing kind of the weird inventiveness that people have been doing with kind of like the whole analog versus technology thing, and how especially lately, and this is probably within the past like 2 years or so, I think as more and more people start to get frustrated with social media and kind of like the limitations of all that, I've loved seeing like how people are trying to, you know, break out of that box, like literally and figuratively, to kind of try and do different things, and the different like lettering styles, different, you know, color palettes that have become kind of more trendy, the way that people are illustrating things, the way that, you know, people from my generation are kind of becoming more of like ad agency people, and bringing some of that life into what I think has become a stagnant world. And, you know, ad agencies will always be kind of stagnant because they're, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people. So you can only do so much with that. But as times start to change, and especially ironically, COVID being such a terrible thing, but also a nice springboard into allowing more people to have a voice through kind of like, you know, all these big companies can't exist as big companies with you under their finger anymore. Everyone's working from home and kind of doing things their own way. You see a lot more people doing things their own way and being very obvious about it. So whether it's people leaving and kind of doing their own things and small studios getting more of a shot, or, you know, people becoming freelancers that maybe never would have, and kind of realizing they were. Had it not been for kind of like the forced isolation, you know, so I think seeing all those changes in the past couple of years has been really interesting and exciting.
Thank you. I think you've inspired a lot of us to just not give a shit and just do what we like. Sorry. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Yeah, go for it, Tom.
Hey John, my name is Saul. But just wanted to ask you, as someone, because hearing your experience, kind of creating your own like clothing brand and everything, like I will eventually want to kind of create my own small business, sell like shirts or different kind of merchandise. Kind of, is there any advice coming that you kind of, or anything I should look into before even kind of attempting something like that? Because I know hearing your experience, you kind of had a lot of things that didn't really go your way, but like kind of from that, like what can I look at before kind of starting something like this?
Oh man, so every industry has their own bumps, right? So like right now we run this other company called Ugly Books, which I don't know if you guys have seen. Hold on, let me I'll pull one out real quick. So there are these, you know, there's these different sketchbooks, they have different color insides and stuff like that. The whole idea of them is to kind of just like force you to be creative in different ways. So how do you draw on red paper? That's your job to figure out, right? So we did the clothing company already. We're doing these sketchbooks and stuff like that. And you find that although every business is very similar, you know, you got your trade shows, you got your retail environments, you got your wholesale, you got all this kind of stuff. They're all slightly different as to how each network works and how the people who are involved kind of, how all the little clicks and everything that form and all that kind of stuff. So like, say, for instance, if you want to start a clothing company, the best thing you can do is figure out how to make it as cheap as possible. So it requires the least amount of money up front. And then find your way into trade shows so that retail places can start picking you up. Because before you know it, like a lot of these stores, if they like what you do and they start picking you up, they'll place some decent orders. The greatest thing for us is when we started, I don't even remember how, but Japan was always the first on everything. And there was a few Japanese stores that reached out to us and we met up and they ordered like $7,000 for their first order. And that for us, that was like, we were rich, you know, it was like, oh my God, $7,000 is unbelievable. And, you know, you get those first few orders in and it feels like someone really wants your stuff. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you can get into stores, people start to see it in stores, those stores start to advertise. So, you know, you're pushing and you're hustling your product as much as you can, but now those stores are also hustling your product because they just want to get paid for all the things that they buy from, you know, trade shows and stuff like that too. So it's like one of those things, it's like, well, how many shirts or hats or pants or sneakers or whatever can I sell at this store? What is it gonna be, like 3 or 4? Not necessarily the problem at first that you need to worry about. What you want to worry about is getting them in there so you get more eyeballs on your product. So whether it's notebooks or t-shirts or, you know, anything that you can come up with, starting to understand that retail environment and making relationships with people who like your product and want to push your product for you, let them have, you know, that kind of, that selfishness where they're like, yeah, we want to push your product because it's going to make us money. Good. We want you to be rich off of our product because that means that we're going to be rich too. So like, if you kind of like let them push it for you, then all of a sudden you realize I got 2 stores over here that are doing it, 2 stores over there. And then before you know it, I got one in this city and one in that city and one in that city. And now you're starting to make a footprint for yourself. And then of course you push your own product online, on your own site and on your own social accounts and newsletters and whatever else you can think of, like just like literally hammer people over the head with it until they get sick of it and then keep hammering them over the head with it. Because it's kind of the nature of advertising where it's just like how many times you see the same commercial every day on every YouTube video you watch or every TV show you watch or whatever. It's the same thing over and over again. And, advertising doesn't change. The platform might change and the length of the commercial might change or the medium of the commercial might change, but it's always the same thing. It's just making people recognize and making people remember. And if you can do that, before you know it, it'll start turning into a thing. And then all of a sudden you've got a business on your hands that you got to maintain and take care of. And it's kind of the best way to do it. But beware, like there are going to be bumps in the roads and you will want to quit many, many times. It's just a matter of how much do you really love it. And if you really, really love it, then don't quit, because at some point you break through some of those bumps and it becomes sustainable. And then you deal with other problems after that. But at least you can get to the point where it's just like, okay, this is my everyday job. And that's really what you want to get to.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're all good. You guys all good tonight? Yeah. Awesome. Give a round of applause. Thanks again, bro. Really appreciate it. All right, we all good? Can you stick around for a sec?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, thanks, guys. Thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, cool. Thanks everybody for joining online as well. Appreciate it.